essential topic for the realization of the Europe's Fit for 55 package. And I'm going to be with you this morning to moderate this session. Before that, a few words about Euroace. As you probably know, Euroace is the Alliance for Energy Efficient Solutions and Services in Buildings. We're going to celebrate our 25th anniversary in 2023, and our purpose is to work together with the institution to build the awareness and political commitments to realize the potential of energy efficiency in buildings. Next slide, please. You know that we are 15 members representing all of the solutions and services from envelope, active and controls systems in buildings. And we are unique in articulating this common voice on energy efficiency in buildings. We know all the benefits, and they are now well known. In this very specific context, we like to remind all the economic, societal and geopolitical benefits of energy efficiency. Also the cost of non-action in the current context. And today's webinar, I would say, is very timely because the EPBD is a key piece from the Fit for 55 package regarding buildings. We already had two in this series on the place for buildings in the Fit for 55, and one just before the summer break regarding renovating historical buildings. And today we're going to look into more details about the MEPS and how they can help leverage and accelerate energy renovation. I'd like to remind that this EPBD is surely about improving the energy performance of our buildings. It's about tackling energy prices, but also economic and geopolitical stability. And it's about people, as we will hear, with over 50 million people in Europe affected by energy poverty. So MEPS are really at the heart of the EPBD revision. So without further ado, we're going to start with Serena Pantoglio from the European Commission, who is a team leader on buildings. And as I forgot at the very beginning, you can surely use the button on Q&A to nourish the discussion that we're going to have after our speakers present their views. Yes, this is going to be supported also in the back office with the Secretariat from Euroace, which I'm thanking for being there with us today. So Serena, you will introduce the rationale for introducing MEPS in this EPBD. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Céline. Good morning, everyone. Just a quick check if you can hear me and if you can see me well.
Yes, perfectly.
Very good. So thank you, Céline, for this introduction. It's my pleasure to be here today to discuss this important topic and to hear from you and from the other experts in the panel about views and experiences regarding minimum energy performance standards. I would like to start somehow from the basics. Because sometimes it's useful really to recall and remember the main rationale of why we are proposing a revision of the energy performance of building directive. What are the main goals? And based on that, what is the role of this new policy measures that we have proposed in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. I would probably repeat data and information that you know already very well, but these are so important that I think it's good to really start from the basics. So as you know, buildings in Europe consume 40% of energy and are responsible for around 36% of greenhouse gas emissions. That's why when we talk about the building sector, we talk about a sector that is definitely important to achieve climate and energy goals. That's why it was foreseen to reinforce action to decarbonize the building stock. And the EPBD, the Energy Performance of Building Directive, was considered to be a EU policy that really could play an important role in there and bring some minimum common rules to be applied all across Europe to really help the decarbonization of the building stock. Because we know that many buildings are old, that need to be renovated, or there were shallow renovations, and that renovations in the building stock proceed at a too slow path. It's the calculations say around 1%, and the energy savings achieved are qualified those renovations as light renovations, while they could be much deeper and really energy could be reduced much more when interventions are made in buildings, and when also interventions that relate to the insulation of the buildings, but also to the replacement of old installations, and especially heating and cooling installations. So for this reason, for all these reasons, and in view of the commitments and goals in relation to energy and climate, it was decided to review the EPBD as part of the Fit for 55 package that was recalled already by Celine. And that happened December last year. And also following the renovation wave communication. The context now is very different. We are in the context of on an emergency in the energy field, high energy prices, shortage of gas, needed to diversify the supply of gas. And lots of actions have been taken at EU level and are still being taken. And it's very clear that what has been put in motion through the Fit for 55 package is really the right thing to do, also to address the issues that we are facing now, and reduce energy demand, reduce in particular the consumption of fossil fuel also in buildings. But the issue is that we should do these things much faster. And in fact, in May, already in the REPowerEU communication, the Commission has made very clear that really the Green Deal and the actions that are being put in place go very much in the right direction. But given the current context, it's really necessary to go faster and deeper. And in particular, as regards the EPBD, the Commission proposed a further amendment to include also a specific mandate for solar energy in buildings, and indicated that minimum energy performance standard, and I will explain later how this is designed, that this tool has proposed in December should in fact be extended, go one step further, and timelines anticipated. So the message is clear from that perspective. We need to continue on what has been proposed, but go faster and deeper. And I would like now to recall a bit what was proposed regarding minimum energy performance standards in the Commission proposal. Again, always useful to call and go back to the basics. So in the EPBD proposal, we addressed the three main goals: the goals of decarbonizing the building stock, renovating more buildings, and the third goal is that of digitalization of the building stock and energy system integration. And in that context, really the key tool to allow for more buildings to be renovated is the minimum energy performance standard. What we did, we looked at the experiences across Europe and also across the world, and we identified this policy tool that basically indicates that the buildings where the potential is higher are the ones that will have to be renovated with priority, because these are low-hanging fruits. The benefits are higher from the point of view of energy, reduction of emissions, but also in relation to the social benefits. So there's a coupling somehow of energy and climate goals and social goals, because very often the buildings that are less well performing are also the ones that are inhabited by low-income households. So it seems really rational somehow and easy to understand that we should really give priority to the renovation of those buildings. And that's why what we proposed is really to start worst building first, so to start with worst performing buildings, which can be identified using a tool that is already part of the tool of the EPBD, which is the Energy Performance Certificate. And in particular, it was foreseen that buildings in the G class will have to be renovated gradually to higher classes, starting first with buildings owned by public bodies, and those also that are non-residential buildings that will have to have an EPC class F by 1st January 27, and then EPC class E by 1st January 2030. While in residential buildings, this requirement will have been proposed to apply 3 years later. In addition to that, we propose that member states shall also, as part of their national building renovation plan, plans establish also specific timelines for achieving higher energy performance. Because of course, if we look at the current EPC classes as they are set, and if we look at the pathway towards 2040 and 2050, we see that already an EP class F by 2030 or an EP class E by 2033 might not be enough already. So this is really what we included in the EPBD is really a first step to be applied across all member states. And this is also linked to a transformation to the EPC, to the energy performance class systems, with many criteria to ensure that there are common and comparable efforts across member states, and that EPC classes are set in a way which is clearly understandable by consumers, by building owners, by the market, and also by financial investors. So in the Commission proposal, the design of minimum energy performance standards is also very much linked to the design of EPC class. And on this, so my last words after I presented what was proposed in EPBD is also it's again on the design on MEPS. So when we thought about how to best shape this instrument, we really looked into an instrument that could be a delivery mechanism for renovations to happen in the most cost-effective way across Europe. So that was the main rationale. We took some decision and some directions in relation to the design of MEPS. Of course, this maybe is not perfect and can be improved. And in fact, we are now in the interinstitutional process in which there are exchanges between in Council and in Parliament about how to design MEPS that could leave enough flexibility to member states to adapt to national conditions. And definitely there we see that there are different ideas and definitely also different ways to design minimum energy performance standards. But what is very important for us is really that the overall goal and ambition of really increasing renovation, decarbonizing the building stock, avoiding backlogs, so ensuring that efforts are done gradually towards 2050, and that we keep in mind that this is also something that we should do much faster given the current situation. These are really very important goals for the Commission in relation to the revision of the EPBD, and to really design this instrument in a way that can really deliver in a time which is compatible with the goals that we have set in climate and energy. And I will stop here, Céline, give you the floor, and I'm available for questions or clarifications that you might have.
Céline, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Serena, for setting the scene. I was saying and being so clear about the convergence of our climate and agenda together with the energy security, the crisis in which we are, and the role that MEPS can play in this context. I will now. So we are going to get questions. Surely, Serena, but we'll take them at the end. I would like now to introduce Camille Defar. Camille works with Jacques Delors Institute and has developed a deep expertise on the building sector. And she will explain how she sees the minimum energy performance standards as a key driver for deep renovation. So Camille, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Céline, and thanks, Serena, as well for setting the scene so clearly. So yeah, I will address the question of why these minimum energy performance standards are a key driver for deep renovation. So next slide. So this on this circle, you can see that this is the total residential building floor area in the EU. And so you see that around a quarter of this floor area is actually renovated, which is quite impressive. However, most of these renovations in brown and red are non-energy renovations or very shallow energy renovations. What we call medium energy renovations, leading to 30 to 60% of energy savings, are actually only 1%. So you see this yellow bar. And deep renovation, leading to 60% of savings and above, are actually the red, the gray bar that you actually barely see. It's only 0.2% of the total of floor renovated every year. And to achieve our climate objectives, we need to achieve during this decade by 2030 3% in annual renovation, deep renovation rate. So next slide. So yeah, to conclude, so the renovation, both the renovation depth and rate must increase. And why do we need to increase deep renovation? It actually can lead to up to 90% of energy savings. So you can see on the left, the red bars show the decrease of energy consumption as over the whole retrofit steps. Why do we call it deep renovation? Because it really addresses all the building's component that impacts the energy consumption. And so you can see around the house at the bottom of the slide, all the different building elements that need to be tackled during a deep renovation. So I'm talking about the roof, the air circulation system, the joinery, space and water heating, walls, as well as floors. And so you need to tackle all this. So this is quite a complex multi-component operation. But in the end, you can see on the right that the infrared picture of your building is going to be completely different. So next slide, please. So deep renovation is amazing. We know we have the skills, we have the knowledge. It's not high-tech technologies that we need to develop. It is very important, as highlighted by Serena, for our energy security, social justice, energy poverty alleviation. We are about to face a very difficult winter. So why aren't we deploying deep renovation, especially given the very high energy prices that we are seeing now? Well, there's knowledge and awareness barriers that might be lifted slowly given the energy context. So we lack a well-communicated decarbonization trajectory and strategy, I would say. there's a lack of awareness of the benefits of deep renovations from households. Usually people think that changing their windows is enough to insulate their home. And there's also a lack of technical support because, as I said, you need to act on all of the building's components. There's also financial barriers. So deep renovation costs about the same as a new car. And then there's access to finance. So even wealthy households might have to contract a loan to undergo renovation and pay for renovation, but the interest rates are quite high for renovation. And for low-income households, it's just they just can't afford to contract an additional loan. Then the supply chain is also very fragmented. There's many stakeholders from the owner, the bank, the component suppliers, the workers. There's lack of a skilled workforce, and also the uncertainty of the quality of the renovation that will be undertaken. And so there's lack of insurance products. Next slide. So these obstacles, we actually have the solutions already. For example, to tackle the lack of access to finance and the lack of technical knowledge, there's this concept of one-stop shops where you can go and access all the information you need and all the technical support you need to carry out your renovation. However, only 5% of the projects actually benefit from support from one-stop shops. And then there's also this industrial renovation that can guarantee very high quality renovations for a very long time frames. And it has been assessed that on the French housing stock, actually 1/3 of the French housing stock could be renovated using this industrial approach. So the solutions exist, but they are not deployed at scale. And so the key obstacle identified by entrepreneurs is the lack of customer-based certainty. And we can see that there's a lack of long-term commitment to deep renovation in the residential sector. For example, in Italy, the super bonus needs to be reconducted every year, so that doesn't give a long-term perspective. Germany missed its building decarbonization objective this year. France also regularly misses its objectives. So next slide. So we are facing actually a highly fragmented supply chain, and that is characterized with a very high inertia. So the construction sector will be reactive rather than proactive towards policy. And so if the goal is to align the construction sectors with the deep renovation needs, what can policymakers do actually? And so the Commission in a GRC report, as well as the European Parliament, actually concluded that what policymakers can do is to send a clear and predictable signal toward the decarbonization of the whole building stock. And for that and for this signaling effect and market creation effect, minimum energy performance standards with the compliance dates as proposed by the Commission in the EPBD are the way to go. Next slide. So I will go quickly over this because it's not so relevant, so I will go for the next slide. So the potential impact, and this will be my last slide, given the time. So the potential impact of MEPS is to actually give the certainty that, for example, all buildings in the EU should reach an EPC level of D by 2030, or heat pump readiness by 2030, let's say, and then an A performance by 2050, which is the climate neutrality objective. This would actually give market certainty over the future demand. And that would allow actually manufacturers of high quality insulation components to industrialize their production, local artisans to look for upskilling programs and to hire additional workers. One-stop shops could also invest into marketing and ads to reach out new customers. And banks would also be incentivized to set up actually in-house expertise and invest into making offering appropriate financial products. Of course, MEPS is a very important tool. It's not the only tool that will make the renovation wave succeed, and the deployment of deep renovation actually needs a policy mix that includes MEPS that are aligned with the objective of climate neutrality, so ambitious energy performance levels and compliance dates, it needs to be supported by stable government technical assistance, training, and funding programs. And to keep in mind also social safeguards that I will not have time to tackle now, but I could address in the questions. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah.
Yes, thanks a lot, Camille, for putting this into context. I like very much how you describe this catalyst power of the MEPS in terms of aligning the perspective of the different actors in the renovation market. And I think this is really key to speed up and to work for more comprehensive and deeper renovation. So thank you, and we'll surely go back to you during the Q&A session. Now, let me welcome Andreas Hemmerling from Guidehouse. Andreas has very in-depth knowledge about buildings, about energy efficiency, and about the EPBD as a whole. And today you will talk to us about the link between the renovation of the worst performing buildings and the positive impact it can have on our energy security. Andreas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Celine, for the introduction. And I'm very pleased that I can continue what the previous two speakers have said. I think that fits very nice. So as you already said, I will talk about the link between worst performing buildings and energy security. Next slide, please. Just to recap, when I talk about worst performing buildings, I mean the EPC classes F and G after the rescaling that Serena already explained. To get an idea about the order of magnitude, we talk about approximately 1/3 of the total floor area that we have today in the EU. When talking about worst performing buildings, 3/4 of this third is allocated in residential buildings. And you can see that the energy consumption in these buildings is very significant when you see that the amount of gas that is currently used in worst performing buildings for heating equaled about 45% of the total gas imports from Russia that we had before the war. Next slide, please. A few months ago, we did an analysis of what actually can be saved, specifically with a view to gas, but also to oil, which is also imported, as you know. And first, we analyzed what can be saved by moving from the worst performing standard to the minimum standard that Serena explained, going to E, which I call here EU level MEPS. I will explain that a little bit further later. And what we see here in these charts is always the final energy that has to be purchased by the users. So not primary energy or something like that, but really what you have to pay for. Currently, we have approximately 800 or let's say 900 terawatt hours that are consumed in worst performing buildings of gas and oil. With the measures, with this minimum jump going to E, EPC class, we would save approximately 30% of this energy, which is already very significant. I'm not going into the details here, but I think that's what you need to take away, that already by going to E, we could save approximately 30% of all the gas and oil that is currently used in worst performing buildings. Next slide, please. So the next step, we were already talking about deep renovation. What could be saved if we go to deep renovation? Again, you have these 900 terawatt hours that we currently use in worst performing buildings for gas and oil. And we already heard that actually you can save up to 90% final energy when going to a deep renovation, which here we have put as approximately class B. So what you have to do is applying a very well insulation on a zero emission building level. You completely phase out fossil fuels in these buildings and you switch to heat pumps. And that makes you get completely rid, as you can see here, of gas and oil in the buildings on site. And on the other hand, of course, you will add some electricity for the heat pumps. So that's what you see on the left. Next slide, please. Very often I hear that we are talking about lighthouse projects, minus 90%. That's not the bread and butter project. But I would like to underline what also Camille already presented by showing this minus 90% example. This is a project that I managed almost 20 years ago in the meantime. It was the first time deep renovation that was done in Eastern Europe. I think we can easily call it deep renovation. What you see here are measured values. They are really metered values, non-corrected. Before renovation, it was 220 kilowatt hours per square meter and year. In the first year after the renovation, it was 40, and after some optimization of the systems, we even went down to 20. And I just provided you here with the average value of 30 kilowatt hours that we reached after renovation. So you see, this is really not rocket science. It's known how it can be done. It has been long known for 2 decades in the meantime, and now it's really time to apply this knowledge. Next slide, please. In this graph, I, in principle, summarize what Serena has already explained. I call it here a 2-level MEPS approach. You see in the middle, you see, first of all, the new reclassified EPC scheme that is proposed by the Commission with classes A to G. The worst performers are F to G, and E is, so to say, the minimum requirement by 2030. So that's a general requirement, and therefore that's why we call it the EU level MEPS, which is the general requirement. But you can see that on the right, we have the A standard and the B standard, and that's what you can call 2050 ready. And that's obviously where we need to get with our new buildings and also with our existing buildings by means of deep renovation. So this also means that EU MEPS have to be complemented by what I call here the member state MEPS. And that's also what Serena explained. Member states definitely need to go beyond Class E in their national building renovation roadmaps, which are the successors of the long-term renovation strategies, in order to really get the building stock to climate neutrality, respecting the local conditions. Ideally, you will do this going from G or F, from worst performing, to a B level, for example, to a deep renovation level, by means of a seamless renovation journey. So it doesn't mean that you stop at E, but of course going to E is just the first step, and then you should really continue to go to deep renovation, and ideally you should do that by using a building renovation passport that will give you all the steps from G to a deep renovation level from the start, so that it's clear also from the start that you're not going to stop after having reached E, but you go on this journey until you have reached a deep renovation level. Next slide, please. So what does it mean for energy security? I try to make it very explicit here to say that what I just described as the EU MEPS is giving us energy security 1.0. I would say this is the first step that really drives independency from fossil fuel imports, specifically seeing the current critical context that also has been explained by Serena before. But I think what is very important is that we also look into the future, because today we are very much talking about independency from fossil fuel imports, of course. But energy security 2.0 will mean that we in Europe also will need independency from renewable energy imports in order to avoid a similar situation that we are facing today. And this only can be achieved if member states really consequently continue the path that the Commission has put with the MEPS level until G, if member states really continue this journey, this MEPS journey towards deep renovation. Because deep renovation, and that's the final aspect I would like to highlight, is, so to say, the incorporation of the energy efficiency first principle. It will safeguard a persistent energy security, so not just getting rid of fossil fuels, but also looking further into the future to get independent from renewable energy imports. And we also heard that it's very important for affordability that we really go this journey beyond Class E towards deep renovation, because not just on the buildings level, but specifically on the systems level, the energy systems level, going to deep renovation will provide us with the lowest cost and also with the highest acceptance within the EU population to achieve a really climate neutral energy system. And because we have a lot of discussion, of course, of replacing gas boilers and other fossil systems by heat pumps, also here it's very important that we have a very efficient building envelope, because this will provide us with very efficient heat pumps and thus also guarantee very low energy costs, even by switching to heat pumps, and of course also saving us from the volatility of energy prices and giving also energy price security when we have very little energy consumption. So that's, so to say, at the core, at the heart of energy security, that we also keep in mind that we follow the energy efficiency first principle. So that's the link I wanted to make. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I would like to hand over to Celine again.
Yes, thanks, Andreas, for opening up towards this very important dimension of what MEPS can deliver. I like how you describe looking into the future, the EU approach and what can be done at EU level and what should also be complemented at member state level with a systemic dimension. It's about energy independence, but it's also about protecting ourselves from energy price vulnerability. So I would say it's a tool for independence and freedom. So thanks a lot. We'll probably get some questions also on that. So keep an eye. I would like to welcome now James Hempel. Oh no, it's going to be Sabine, because James is going to join us immediately after. So we adapt. So Sabine is leading with other players the Renovate Belgium campaign. And Sabine, you will describe the interaction between financing supporting measures and the deployment of MEPS. This is indeed a very important dimension. We just talked about acceptability, but I think the supporting tool to anticipate the deployment of MEPS is going to be key in their success. So Sabine, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, but we can't see you. So you just put on your...
This should be better now. Yes.
Camera. Yes.
Okay. So today I'm speaking to you on behalf of Renovate Belgium. Renovate Belgium is the Belgian equivalent of the well-known Renovate Europe campaign. And we have actually been active for the last 8 years, I think, in Belgium, trying to stimulate energy renovations. Next slide, please. Before I really start my presentation, I have to give a warning, something that is important to understand the content of today's presentation. Belgium is a federal state, pretty much like Switzerland, and we have different regions, Flanders, Brussels, and Wallonia, which are competent for different aspects of policies, and energy is one of them. So in Belgium, we have 3 different long-term renovation strategies, also 3 very different government coalitions, and 3 different approaches to subsidies and MEPS. Flanders is the only region which has announced MEPS as of 1st of January next year. And in Brussels and Wallonia, the topic is being analyzed, I would say, and big work is currently being done on improving energy performance certificates to allow the introduction of MEPS. Next slide, please. In terms of financing renovation, we have had several plans in Belgium targeting recovery and resilience. European budget, but also federal and regional budgets have been put on the table. And there is a lot of money when you look at it. I mean, 60% of the recovery and resilience facility are meant to be invested in the building sector, and 17% only for renovation. We also have a system of VAT reduction from 21 to 6%, specifically for buildings older than 10 years. And then we have different schemes in Wallonia, Flanders, and Brussels, putting quite some money on the renovation of social housing, on support to the renovation of private housing, etc. So there is, you could say, a lot of money on the table, and the question is to see now if it does affect the renovation rate in Belgium. Next slide, please. Today, I will focus specifically in the presentation on the case of Flanders, because it is precisely one region which has announced MEPS for next year. So it's interesting to consider how they have prepared that. Next slide, please. Well, first of all, you could say that obligations are not so new in Flanders concerning minimal requirements for housing. A first obligation was implemented in the Housing Quality Code, which is called the Woon Code, as of 2015 for roofs, so the minimum insulation level for roofs. And in 2020, Flanders introduced a prohibition of single glazing. So buildings that were not compliant with a certain level of insulation were declared as non-compliant and not fit for renting. You can also see in the table above that insulation measures, renovation measures have been taken already quite broadly in Flanders. So you could say that you have to build on past measures to make new measures more stringent. And that's what we are going to see in the next slide. The current step that has been taken by Flanders is to increase and simplify financing. And for that, they have just introduced a new subsidy for renovation, which is really a one-stop shop merging all renovation and energy efficiency subsidies with an increased subsidy level. And this is really seen as a post-COVID recovery measure. It can be combined with reduced property taxation. So it's not that you have to choose between the systems. And it can also be combined with an interest-free loan up to 60,000 euros. So again, you could say, well, these are really strong measures and they should have a big impact. I have to say that this subsidy has just been introduced before the summer, so we are still waiting to see its impact on the market. Next slide, please. Now, the final step, you could say, is MEPS, which will be introduced as of 1st of January 2023 in Flanders. And the point is that within 5 years of selling a building or buying a building, this building will have to move from label E or F to label D or better. And here, of course, you see the importance of having energy performance certificates that are reasonably solid, so that we can really introduce these measures. And it is definitely the case for Flanders. Flanders has been investing quite some effort in the development of energy performance certificates and also into a digital tool gathering all the information about building, which is called the Warning Pass. And it is already announced right now that the pass will be strengthened progressively. So it looks very good. We are there. We have introduced MEPS as of next year in Flanders. Are there perhaps some caveats we should introduce? And this will be my last 2 slides. On the question of financing renovation, I would like to draw your attention to a study that was led 2 years ago in Belgium by the Federation Agoria. They asked a university professor to analyze the financing capabilities of Belgian people to renovate their property. And it turns out that 40 to 51% of owners are not able to finance climate renovation. And here you can say, well, it's really bad news. But you could also see it the other way around and think that half of the owners are able to finance their renovations. So I don't know if it is really bad news or good news. Well, it's a fact. And for these people who are not able to finance their renovation, even if you offer limited subsidies, it will make no difference because they would need 50,000 euros or more. We can also see in the study that climate renovations are not a priority for homeowners. Their priorities are comfort, utilization of the building, or resale value. Well, this was of course done 2 years ago, so the motivations might change now that energy has become so expensive. But still, at the time, you would see people preferring to invest in a new kitchen than in energy measures. The study also highlighted that a huge majority of renovation were phased renovation. And I think here we have an issue because it is demonstrated that phased renovation are more complex and more costly. So considering the huge amount of money we will need to renovate our building stock, one could consider if we shouldn't really try to encourage as much as possible one-step renovations. But what is also interesting in this study is a previous study that is actually part of the literature review of Professor Albrecht's study, which I think was nice perhaps to mention here because it analyzes the impact of measures on the renovation rate in countries. It defines 3 types of measures: financial, regulatory, or informative. And the result of the analysis is to highlight that technical regulation has a predictable positive impact on the renovation rate, while the impact of financial incentives and information is smaller. And up to now, of course, member states have focused on information and financing, not on introducing minimal requirements, which is perhaps why we see the situation we currently have. Without minimal requirement, we just don't make it. And then the final slide. Another study which I also find pretty interesting, and not only because as a village representative, I'm proud to say that we sponsored it, but it was a study made in the, I would say, the follow-up of the previous study by Agoria to try and find a solution for the 40 to 51% of households who cannot renovate if they don't have access to pre-financing. So the whole study really focuses on pre-financing mechanism. And in fact, depending on the level of fragility of the target groups, or you would say their disposable income for renovation, you could see actually several solutions. For example, interest-free loans up to 30 years, or a system where the payback is actually based on the savings on the energy bill. And then another more innovative solution, which you would call the bullet loan, where you would actually pay back for the renovation when you sell the property. And these measures are really targeted, as I said, at more fragile classes of the population, because we basically need to renovate the whole building stock. And we need to find solutions as no one state will be able to provide the whole financing for that. And that was my final note. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine, for describing what is in place in several regions in Belgium. I think this is very inspiring what you describe as, yes, the integration of MEPS in the regulatory framework, the synchronization with financing tools. So that is, in my view, very powerful. And let's keep that in mind for our discussion later on. I think yes, the maturity and the speed of development in this discussion can only be underlined, I would say, for the other countries as well. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker from Scotland, because the Scottish government has also been progressing relatively fast on the topic of MEPS. And today, James Hemphill, who works for the Scottish government, head of heat regulation, is going to talk to us about the Scottish strategy to decarbonize homes by 2045. So the floor is yours. Good to have you on board.
Thanks, Celine, and thanks for inviting me to speak. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name's James Hemphill from the Scottish Government, and what I hope to do this morning is really give you a snapshot of where we are in Scotland with introducing minimum energy performance standards. I guess firstly, sort of setting the scene, where our proposals come from, what it is we're aiming to deliver, and then before delving into a wee bit of detail about how we propose to do that in practice. So could we move on to the next slide, please? So yeah, I'll just quickly skirt over this. So in Scotland, we have a range of legal duties that are placed on our ministers. One of the overarching ones that we have is flows from the Climate Change Act of 2019, where we are legally required to reach net zero emissions across the economy by 2045, which is, I think most of you will recognise that as a little bit in advance of much of the rest of Europe, much of the rest of the world, but in particular the rest of the UK, which is needing to reach that target of net zero by 2050. Which places some challenges for us as a devolved government, where we don't have the full suite of powers to take forward that in the way that we might always ideally want to. So there is the overarching net zero target that we're aspiring to, but also we have got a legal duty to reduce emissions by 3/4 by the end of this decade, which in some ways might be more challenging than the overall net zero target. We also have specific targets to decarbonise parts of the building sector through connections to heat networks. So you can see there that we've got various supply targets to reach this decade in 2027 and 2030, and those are roughly equivalent to around about 10% of our housing stock being connected to heat networks by the end of the decade. Again, that's a legal target that ministers will have to meet by the end of this decade. And in, I guess, achieving these heat decarbonisation and overall sort of emissions reductions targets, we also need to make sure that we are not exacerbating fuel poverty, and actually that we're substantially reducing it to no more than 5% of households by 2040, from a rate of around, I think, 1/4 of all households in Scotland at the minute being in fuel poverty. So that's, in a nutshell, the sort of the drivers of what we're doing here in Scotland. Sometimes, you know, these things sort of butt up against each other, and not always the most easy things to reconcile. But these are the legal obligations that our ministers have, and that we as a Scottish Government need to try and deliver. Could we jump on to the next slide, please? Thanks. So what this means for the building sector in Scotland, basically at the minute we are the 3rd largest emitter of emissions in the country, comes from the building sector, and by that I mean homes and sort of commercial non-domestic buildings, public sector buildings, really any non-domestic building other than the industrial sector. So we are a substantial cause of emissions in Scotland. To reach that interim target in 2030, we need to decarbonise the equivalent of 1 million homes by the end of the decade. And I guess for context, we have around 2.5 million homes in Scotland. So it's nearly half of all homes that will have to decarbonise by the end of the decade. To Decarbonising the stock as a whole will come at a cost of around £33 billion, give or take a little bit, and the portion of that falls within this decade comes in at around £14 billion. So clearly it's quite costly. The ongoing running costs are another issue that we all face. Retail electricity at the minute in the UK works out at around over 3 times more expensive for households than continued use of mains gas. And at the minute we only see around 3,000 homes each year transitioning from gas boilers to heat pumps, heat network connections, or other renewable heating technologies. So this is just a wee snapshot of where we are in Scotland at the minute. Our energy efficiency standards in the domestic sector, the vast majority of those are in that sort of median range there of EPCC or EPCD. By 2033, we want to see all homes reach a minimum of EPCC where it's technically feasible and where it's cost effective. So we do have quite a bit of work to do there. But as you can see in the far right column there, in terms of heating systems, the scale of the challenge is even greater. We've got something like 2.2 million homes to decarbonise by 2045. And there in the middle, you can see in the non-domestic sector, although we only have around 200,000 non-domestic buildings in Scotland, the energy performance of those at the moment, as you can see there, is generally quite poor. We need to increase that substantially as well over this next period in time. So can we jump on to the next slide, please? So not to dwell on the challenges, what I would like to really get into is how we're planning to address this in Scotland. So at the minute, we've got some building blocks here in Scotland. We have quite comprehensive domestic and non-domestic advice services, which signpost and help consumers through to access our loans and grant schemes that we have or are about to have here in Scotland. We have dedicated fuel poverty programmes that are run by both local authorities in specific areas, as well as a national scheme that more discrete households in fuel poverty can access. And we have various pieces of legislation that are helping us to sort of plan the transition from gas network connections towards other forms of decarbonised heat. So we're hopefully not starting from ground zero in Scotland, but we did recognise that to achieve these overarching targets, we needed to refresh our overall strategy and approach. So last year in October, we launched our heat in building strategy, which made over 100 actions, committed over 100 actions that we're going to take as a government to achieve the targets. And just pulling out some of the highlights, really, it's commitments to levels of investment during the term of Parliament that we've never quite reached before in Scotland. This is fairly groundbreaking investment that we're going to make over the next period in time. Also engaging with the public really quite meaningfully over the next wee while. In the early part of this decade, in order that we're laying the groundwork that people will be more accepting and more aware of the issues of continued use of fossil fuel heating, as well as launching a new public energy agency to sort of coordinate and streamline the programmes that we do have to deliver energy efficiency and heating system replacements. But I think the part that would be good to speak to you about this morning is our commitment to primary legislation. So a new bill in this Parliament that is going to require all homes to reach a minimum of EPCC or the equivalent thereof by 2033, to phase out the installation of new fossil fuel boilers starting in 2025, as well as standards for non-domestic buildings. So I'll go into a little bit of detail about that just now before handing over for questions. So could we jump over to the next slide, please? So this is just a quick overview of the timescales that we're working to. So there's been a lot of talk about MEPS this morning. We've been sort of terming this a heat and building standard, or a HIB standard here in Scotland, and essentially it has two elements to boil it down. The first is a requirement to meet a minimum energy efficiency standard by 2033, and the second would be a prohibition on the continued use of direct emissions heating systems after 2045. And what we mean by direct emissions heating systems are those that produce emissions when combustion takes place within the curtilage of the building. So essentially gas or oil or LPG boilers, those sorts of things. And we can see here in the timeline that those standards will start to take effect from 2025, and certainly in existing homes and in the new build sector, that standard will start to take effect ahead of time in 2024. With legal backstop dates that people have to meet in the years 2033 and 2045. I think we're about to see a little pop-up. Yep, there we go. And what we're trying to show here is that in the intervening periods between 2025 and 2033, and 2025 and 2045, we need to make progress so that we avoid bottlenecks at those backstop years. But also so that we make the progress that we need to make in terms of the overall emissions reductions targets, and that it's a fairly consistent annual installation rate that we see. So that has been a big part of the work that we've been doing over the past few months, is to determine at what point in time would it be reasonable to ask people to make these changes. And that's balancing out, I guess, the effectiveness of those sort of periods in time versus the proportionality of what we're asking people to do. So some options might be requiring people to replace their, when their heating system breaks down, not to replace it with a new gas boiler, or potentially when they purchase a property, that they might be given a period of time to meet the energy efficiency and the direct emissions heating prohibitions. It could be when heat networks become available, or when a home is refurbished, or when a change of tenancy occurs. So these options are all still on the table, and will go to public consultation next year. But essentially, we know that we need to take action at an appropriate point or points in time between the years 2025 and 2033 and 2045. So if we could move on to the next slide. The standard itself, as I say, is made up of two elements. The minimum energy efficiency standards, to delve into that a little bit more, it'll essentially be a maximum space and hot water heating requirement that will be specified in kilowatt hours per metre squared per year. And that will essentially be defined in terms of what level of space and hot water heating requirement is, or what is the maximum level that is needed to be able to enable a low temperature heat pump in a home, but also to make sure that it isn't diluting the ambition that both we as a government and the wider Scottish Parliament has had around the need to reach a minimum of EPCC. So that'll be the overarching energy efficiency standard. But what we would also like to do is to specify to the public that they can meet that standard through the installation of a very specific list of measures. So as a kind of indicative kind of indication, those measures might be loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, suspended floor insulation, those things that you can see listed there. And the rationale for wanting to be able to do that is that we can quite simply communicate to people what it is exactly that we need them to do, rather than need to go out and undertake what can sometimes be quite a intensive assessment of the performance of the home, but also that the supply chain knows exactly the measures that are going to be demanded by the public, so that they can start to mobilise in this decade and start to deliver on some of the logistical and scaling challenges that we have. I think it's important to say that we realise this meeting this standard won't come easily for homes or cheaply from homes. We think that this will cost the equivalent of around £14,000 for the average household. The vast majority of that is made up from the heating system replacement. So, as I say, we expect to go to consultation on this idea early next year. And I guess part of the work that we need to do to get there is to take some independent research to help us specify what this minimum energy efficiency standard should be, so that we can go out and explain that and take views from the public and from experts on whether that's a sufficient level of ambition and what it will achieve. And alongside that, we will want to reform the energy performance certificates so that they can start to act as I guess a checklist of where homes are in relation to the minimum energy efficiency standard. So when they're sold, for example, the incoming purchaser can take account of the building's performance and the potential liability that they might be taking on. So could we pop over to the next slide, please, and I'll try to wrap up. Yeah, this is really just about, this is quite wordy, so apologies, but this is really about our plans to reform the EPCs themselves. I don't think we need to dwell on this one. I think we really just, it's going into a little bit more detail about our plans to reform EPCs and to draw out the essential information that consumers will need to know, as well as trying to sort of move the perverse incentives that we sometimes see through the recommendations from EPCs, try to sideline those a little bit so that homeowners understand what they're going to be legally obliged to do, and where they can find help, support and advice on how to meet those standards. So I think that's me.
Thank you, James. Wow, it's very rich and complete. I'm very impressed by the approach that you've been taking. Interaction between heating decarbonization and efficiency of the building envelope, and also how you've been engaging with the stakeholders. So good luck for the consultation and the next steps. And that's I'm sure this is going to inspire other partners. So we now have a bit more than around between 10 and 15 minutes for the Q&A. So please keep sending your questions. I already have seen a couple. So yeah, logistics. You will receive the PowerPoint presentations. There will be a replay for this webinar, and the links to research mentioned by Sabine will be shared as well as other sources that were shared. I would invite all of our speakers to unlock the camera, like Andreas, and I will open up with the first question that I received for Camille, which is linked to the share of building renovated via a one-stop shop solution. You mentioned something like 5%. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that. Thank you.
Sure, thank you for the question. So yeah, indeed, only 5% of the surveyed participants benefited from support from a one-stop shop. I don't know if you know people around you who actually renovated their home, and if they did they do a renovation? And if they did the energy renovation, did they benefit from support from a public or private entity to help them navigate the complex subsidies, regulations, and technical standards? And so, unfortunately, there's a lack of deployment of the one-stop shops, and that's also being tackled by the current Fit for 55 package, how to support the deployment of public and private one-stop shops. There is, for example, some windows at the national level or at the local level, but they are not always accessible for everyone. Not everyone knows about them. And in the case of France, for example, we have this system called FAIR, which is a one-stop shop. It's, however, only digital. It can be accessed to have in-person support for some vulnerable households, but it's clearly not at the scale that should be required should we have a deep renovation wave. And to conclude, we are seeing that with the recovery plan, for example, in France, again, we've seen a higher levels of subsidies for renovation. And we've seen that one-stop shops, public one-stop shops, have been a bit overwhelmed by the amount of technical assistance needed by households. So there's a need, again, to, if we strengthen the regulation, if we really are serious about deep renovation scale up, we really need to have the regulation go hand in hand with technical and financial support.
If I may add something, perhaps, there is actually an interesting experiment going on in Wallonia in this regard, which is called Reno Plus. And the idea is to provide, I would say, a full one-stop shop, combining not only the technical advice, but also the financing and the deployment of the works. So the whole idea is to try to structure the whole ecosystem around renovation in Wallonia. It's a pilot project for now. They're trying to, you know, put all the actors together and look at what we could come up with as a solution. And the idea is also to make renovation deeper, but also more simple, less costly, and faster. So it's a little bit trying to find a miraculous solution probably to all the problems we have, but I think it's an interesting example and it was worth mentioning.
Yes, actually, it's a very good point, very interesting. I will check it out, but there's many actually pilots that need to be scaled up. That's also very encouraging, and the European Commission, actually, Serena, you know this better than everyone else here, has been funding many pilot projects that actually could be scaled up quite rapidly. I think we have a very good basics to start with.
Yes, thanks for referring to those pilots and the positive creativity on integrating finance and support measure. It will be key. I said that in EURES we believe that the perspective provided by a MEPS mechanism will also help develop those the scaling up of those pilots much faster. I would now turn to Sabine again and maybe James together, because we've heard about cost here, and but quite different ones. Sabine referred in Flanders to this study that was estimating to 50,000 euro the cost of deep renovation, whereas for James you had a range around 14,000 pounds. Maybe you can explain what was considered in this different estimation, and say also how the scheme in place can help tackle those. Yes, maybe James, you want to go first? Yeah.
Sure. So the £14,000 estimate that we have, I think that the most important thing to say is that it's a real estimate across the building stock as a whole in Scotland. You know, as far as we can define a typical home in Scotland, that would be sort of the rough figure we're looking at. But there is huge variance in the potential costs of meeting this standard. Potentially tens of thousands of pounds that would be much more similar to the figure that Sabine provided. I think the other thing to note about our estimate is that it doesn't include other works that might be needed to enable the standard, so maybe repairs to the roof to enable, let's say, loft insulation, or repairs to the windows or the external walls, to enable some of the insulation of, you know, say, cavity wall insulation, these sorts of things. So that could potentially be other costs that are hidden within there. That aren't included in that estimate. But we do see, we have seen projects that have very deep retrofit in Scotland as well, and they're much similar to the figure that you provided, Sabine. I guess what we're hoping to do is in setting standards that they'll be of a level and of a cost that are applicable across the whole country. given that they'll be legislated and they'll legally apply to us all equally, that we need to get to a standard that's effective but proportionate and can be delivered by most homes, except where that isn't really feasible or cost effective. Some of the projects that we have seen that are very deep retrofit in Scotland, as much as they're greatly valuable, in the context of the overall value of the home, it's sometimes difficult to justify a national standard at that sort of level and that sort of cost.
Did I understand it well, James,
yes.
that the amount you mentioned was primarily targeting the heating system, right? So that's really what you described, right? Okay, then I think it makes sense. The only issue, of course, with that is that if you tackle the, I would say, the emitting system, the most emitting system in your building, which I can understand is a priority, you have several risks, of course. The first one is that you replace a heating system with a heating system which is still dimensioned for a house which is not renovating. So even if it's more efficient from a CO2 perspective, you could have probably done with a smaller system if you had renovated the envelope of the building. So that's one thing. And then in terms of the well-being of the occupants, of course you solve the question of heat in the winter, but you don't solve all the other health-related aspects like mold, etc. So I think that's the message we're trying to convey in Belgium with the Renovate Belgium. It's important to really tackle the envelope as well and the building as a whole. So yeah, but of course it's costly. So.
Yes, and building on that, Sabine, because I think it's very important. We explained the benefits of renovation in terms of overall improvement for the occupants in terms of comfort, health, and well-being. So the question comes to how to ensure, even if they are spread out over time, how to ensure that all the steps will be completed. Andreas, you hinted to that with a two-step approach. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this completion of all the steps. Is the solution the parallel deployments, I mean parallel to MEPS, the deployments of those building renovation passport, and is that doable in this decade? Because we know that we already have to catch up with deployment of energy performance certificates, but it's a bit like two sides of the same coin to have the MEPS and maybe the passport. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, I was hinting that we definitely need to get to a climate neutral building stock, which is also the proposal of the Commission. And that, of course, does not mean that we stop at a level of E or something like that. But in principle, we need to make sure that by 2045 or the latest by 2050, we have, let's say, a mainly deeply renovated building stock. And what I've explained is that going to E, that's also what the other presenters have shown, from the worst performing level is just the first step in a renovation journey that should lead you to a deep renovation level. Maybe making this clear, what I found very interesting in James' presentation was that he said they have in their EPCs two measures beyond primary energy, and one of them is the energy cost, he said. And actually, that's one of my super preferred measures that I also would like to see in EPCs across Europe. Of course, we need to discuss how to do it, but in the end, that's really what matters for people. And if they, let's say, only do some optimization of the heating system, or they only change windows, or they only insulate the roof, that will, of course, bring down the energy cost a little bit, but seeing the steeply rising energy prices, probably it won't really bring down the overall cost that you have to pay for your energy. And therefore, I think we really need to do everything that we can. We need to improve building fabric, the envelope, insulate roofs, walls, improve the windows, and also improve the heating system, and of course, getting rid of fossil fuels. So we really need this package and it just depends on the building what makes most sense. As Dean said, where it makes sense, of course, you should do a one-off renovation, getting directly to a deeply renovated level. But as we also know from other studies that we've done, and Camille, I think, has shown the numbers from our 2019 study, the 0.2 renovation rate for deep renovations. Of course, that's extremely low, but also we have to acknowledge that the reality of renovations that we see today is the step-by-step renovation, and that's just not just the case in Belgium or in Flanders, but we found that's the reality across Europe in our 2019 study. And I think we need to also acknowledge this reality, and therefore I think building renovation passports are an extremely important tool to accompany MEPS that go towards deep renovation, to really make sure that you have the most cost-efficient pathway for your individual building to get to deep renovation, because as we know, of course, all the buildings have different characteristics, and you cannot renovate them with a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's exactly the purpose of the building renovation passports, that you get a tailor-made pathway that brings you to a deep renovation level. And to the question that you said, Celine, of course, I would like to have all the building stock of Europe renovated until 2030 to deep renovation, but as we all know, we have restrictions in terms of capacity of installers and also of financial capacity, and therefore, we need to pick the low-hanging fruits first, because you get the biggest payback or the quickest return, of course, and that's what we need in a very short time now to get rid of what I also highlighted of fossil fuels, that we get this energy security 1.0 first to really tackle the buildings that have the highest consumption, where with the money that we realistically can spend until 2030, and also with the installer capacity that we realistically have until 2030, we achieve the biggest possible impact. That's very important, I think, to keep that in mind. But we still do not need to forget that then we still need to continue this journey until a climate neutral building stock. And there are also other questions I've seen with how to make sure that these savings are actually achieved. And I think that also gets back to what James presented. I think energy cost is a super important indicator. And of course, also the real kilowatt hours that you consume. I think consumers need to be aware, and I'm personally, or also the whole team here at Guidehouse, we are very big fans of monitoring of the actual achieved savings. I showed you this example from Hungary. So these were real metered values. And I also told you that after the first heating season, we were at 40 kilowatt hours. And then we analyzed it, we optimized the system. And after the second winter, we were at 20 kilowatt hours. So there is an optimization potential always that you have after having implemented the measures. But you also need to have the possibility for the user to verify that these savings actually occur. And therefore, I think that seeing the cheap monitoring technology that we have today, it must be standard, that we provide a possibility to the user to monitor the actual saving. And I think we also need to find ways that we kind of couple the actual achieved savings to the level of finance. And we also need to assign responsibilities for these savings, of course, because we cannot just leave alone the user in the end with much higher energy cost. And I, of course, know the easy example. Yeah, it's, of course, user behavior that makes it impossible to guarantee anything. But there are measures that are quite independent from user behavior, like, for example, seasonal efficiency, performance of heat pumps. That are quite independent from user efficiency, and that can be the responsibility of installers or manufacturers. And I think we also need to think into that direction.
Well, thanks, Andreas, for those reflections and the whole picture. Indeed, the digital tools available today will definitely help not only the understanding and the taking of the different steps, but maintaining over time and reaching the highest level of performance. I'd like now to turn to Serena. We have a few minutes left, but maybe yes, a question from me now is, yeah, we've heard very inspiring stories this morning around MEPS. This gives me hope that during the negotiations, some room will be made to design a scheme that can be, yes, comprehensive, flexible, effective, but also supported by the right schemes in terms of finance and the acceleration of the business models. So maybe to you, how do you see that? As an additional question, how can we further help in that respect?
Thank you very much, Céline. I think the presentation of this morning were really, I think, pointing to the feasibility of and the fact that having minimum energy performance standards applied already in different regions and countries in Europe and across the world really provides a lot of evidence and inspiration that really this is a tool that can deliver renovations and can adapt to different contexts. As I mentioned before, and you asked about the current discussion, I think really to have to have information about how these experiences are proliferating and working can definitely inform very much the current discussion in the interinstitutional process and the actors in the interinstitutional process. So in the member states, in council, and in the parliament. So I really congratulate you for this webinar today, really putting around such relevant experiences. I think there are so many take-home messages and inspiration of how things can really be done. And I really encourage you to inform as much as possible the ongoing process really with this sort of events and sharing of practices, of discussions that are ongoing, also with stakeholders in stakeholder consultation, or also in the national and local authorities that really can provide evidence and food for thought regarding how to set some criteria at EU level that then can be used really in the member states to build upon and to really have very comprehensive building policies. I think I'm really very encouraged for what I see that is going on. There have been really very ambitious, I would say, programs that have been adopted currently, that have been accelerated by the current context, for instance, in the Netherlands, and we saw also in Belgium. So I think this is really very good that this what is been happening is really shared and informs this debate. So definitely, I think that's I see really discussions of this kind and sharing of information on policies ongoing at national and local level as really very important for us and for the actors in the process to progress on the negotiation of the EPBD. And I would really like to thank the other presenters for the very good presentations and inspiring also for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena. So will I thank all of you for the presentations. Obviously, we have still a number of pending questions. I suggest that we take them separately, and we provide a question in addition when circulating the slide and the replay of this webinar, which will be available in the next couple of days. I really, thank you. It's very inspiring. I'm even following the topic closer. We always learn about new schemes, and that's what makes me hopeful regarding this important topic within the revision of the EPBD directive. We also hear that all this progress means that in responding to the converging agendas, climate change, energy security, fuel poverty, it is possible to develop adequate response. And I think this is quite far-reaching. This is possible in all the building segments, and that flexibility, which we've heard of, is combined with effective scheme. So again, thank you for all of this, and waiting for the next steps. And to all the participants, also thanks for your participation and your interesting questions. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Very much.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.